Hey everybody, so welcome back. We are now ready to dive into one of the probably what I think is one of the best topics that we go over in this class, because this one is a super valuable chapter that we're going to kind of talk about at the topic that we are here, and that is evaluating our company's external environment. How do we actually evaluate and get a good idea of what the competitive landscape looks like against the people we're competing against in our industry? So it makes sense we would start off, with this quote here from Michael Porter, who we're going to hear from quite a bit today. In that sense, he's the one that came up with the framework we're actually going to be using in talking about this. And he said, the essence of a strategist is to understand and cope with competition. So it makes a whole lot of sense that we need to really understand who our competition is and what the forces look like within the industry that we operate, right? Remembering that when we're talking about this idea of industry, it's where the other people we are competing against. So as we jump into it, there are a few critical questions that we need to be able to answer in order to really understand the external environment fully, but nothing is more important than this first one. What does our industry really look like? What is the realities of the industry that we are a part of and that we are competing in? Now, while I do try to keep these videos under that 10-minute mark, this one might go a little over, just because this is an extremely important area for you to get a good grasp of. It will definitely be something that's going to be asked of you moving forward, like by the time we get to our final exam. So really make sure that you've got a decent grasp of this today, right? So in order to analyze our industry's attractiveness, right, or analyze basically what the reality of doing business in the industry we're a part of is, we use Michael Porter that we just had that quote from. We use his model, which is called the Porter's 5 Forces. Any of you who might have taken like Management 301, like Intro to Management or anything like that, you are likely familiar with this idea. You may not have a super in-depth knowledge of it, but you've probably been exposed to it a bit. And if you haven't yet, we're going to walk you through it here today. Okay. But what we're going to need to do is we got to do 3 things. And first of all is we got to be able to identify the specific competitive pressures that are associated with each of these 5 forces in this model. We got to be able to evaluate how strong those pressures are. Essentially, we want to determine whether or not, because each of these forces will be present in some capacity, but we want to try and think of it as a continuum. Is this force weak? Is this force middle of the road, moderate, about average, or is it strong? And then finally, we got to determine whether or not the collective strength of all 5 of these forces together are creating an industry that's really conducive to earning high or good industry profitability. We often use this test when we in entrepreneurship in order to determine whether or not the industry we're going to launch ourselves into is actually one where we can make some money, one that's easy to get into, one for us to thrive within. But sometimes, it's difficult because things are changing. And the challenge is for us to really craft a competitive strategy that at very least allows us as a firm to hold our own against our rivals, that ideally, and hopefully ideally produces some sort of competitive edge over many, if not all of our rivals. So what we need to really understand is break down and understand this model right here. Very plain and simply, there's some easy questions to associate with each of these facets of Porter's 5 forces, but what we're going to do is we're going to break it down a little more. So I'll leave these here as just high-level questions for you to review if you'd like, but we're going to talk about each of these a little more detail now. Starting with the middle of that model, this rivalry amongst existing competitors, right? So the other forces tend to really kind of like change in the same types of ways for all organizations in a common industry, but rivalry among existing competitors is this reality for everyone within our industry, right? When one firm makes some sort of strategic moves, all of the other rivals tend to respond with counter moves. It can be one, if not multiple of this list, and then extending beyond it. We can do all sorts of different things, right? the way we think about competitive responses to our competitors' decisions that are making. Oh, you're going to lower your price. Well, I'm going to do the same. Or you're going to you're going to expand into a new market. Well, I'm going to offer a new product that is appealing to that same market and try to get in there and make sure that you don't have a leg up on me, kind of thing, right? So this all has to do. All these other forces really make up the rivalry amongst existing competitors. All this like constant maneuvering that we do as businesses, all this jockeying all around, often it's going to result in a competitive battle of sort, right, among our industry rivals. And the stronger this rivalry is, honestly, as a business, we understand that it's less and less attractive for us as a business to have higher and higher competition. Makes sense, right? Because if we, fiercer and fiercer competition means it's more difficult for us to get a leg up, to perform better, to outperform others, all these kinds of things. So we definitely, we don't favor an industry where competition is super high, but it is the reality for a lot of them. Now, this overall strength of rivalry, it can change in a lot of different ways. And I won't exhaust all of these again. I give you these slides so that you can review some of these, but just understanding that, these are good examples right here of when rivalry might strengthen or intensify, and when rivalry might be mitigated or lessened. It might become less, competitive, the strength of the rivalry. So, we can understand how, just giving an example in here, maybe all of a sudden, buyer demand is really low or falling. We have fewer people purchasing, but we still have all of these competitors who all need to make sales. So as buyer demand falls, of course, our strength of rivalry is going to increase. We're going to start doing anything and everything we can, including sometimes, using cutthroat approaches to things in order to make sure we get those sales, because there's fewer of them to go around. So essentially our pie is getting smaller, but the number of people who need to eat from it is staying the same. So we understand that rivalry increases greatly when things like that happen. Or, at the opposite end of that spectrum, if buyer demand is really high or growing a ton, we're going to have tons of sales to go around, and therefore maybe the strength of rivalry is not quite as intense at that point. There are tons of examples right here. I definitely welcome you to review through all of these, get a good idea of what kinds of elements within an industry might just cause this competitive force to change just a little bit. Now, equally important to this model is this idea of the threat of new entrants, right? And all we're talking about here is how easy is it for other people to enter into this market or into this industry? Is it going to be easier? Like, I'm trying to get into it, or I'm operating within this industry. So how easy is it for new competitors to continue to enter? Because we don't want that, right? We don't want more and more people coming into our industry and taking up, the limited amount of sales or demand that there are within the industry already. Essentially, the threat of new entrants, really, the strength of it is going to depend on numerous things, but it could be any, if not all of these kinds of things, right? Are there barriers to entry, what we talk about, right? Is it going to be things like, if it takes a whole lot of initial capital in order to get established in that industry, right? Like something like, I use something like nuclear power plants, right? You can't just one day be like, I think I'm going to get into that business. I think I'll just go get into the industry of nuclear power. I think I'll go ahead and start doing that. Like, probably didn't take much to start there, right? That would be an example, right? An industry that's going to have very high barriers to entry. You're going to have to follow a lot of very stringent laws, codes, requirements. You're going to need extremely specialized personnel and knowledge. You're going to have an enormous amount of capital and know-how. So all of these things make it harder and harder. So the threat of new entrants in an industry like that is, of course, very low, because there's very little threat that somebody could just decide to be a part of your industry and saturate the number of competitors within your industry, right? And it can be a ton of different things about this. But this whole idea is our industry, the attractiveness of it and our ability to create or to make profit is going to be influenced by this idea. Basically, how easy is it for people to enter that industry and become our competitors, right? And it can be determined off of many of these different things. So the threat of new entrants, as those barriers increase, the threat of new entrants decreases, because essentially we can think of it as there's a roadblock that is significant that stops this threat of new entry from being realized. Okay? Strength of the strength of the threat changes based off of lots of things as well. You know, it can either be intensified or mitigated, just like the last. I'm going to leave these lists for you to review if you'd like, and understanding that, of course, you got questions about them, holler at me. I'm more than happy to help make some sense of these if there are some nuanced questions that you have about why something might increase or decrease, you know, the threat of entry. Now, we also have what we call threat of substitutes, right? What kind of threat is there legitimately for somebody offering a substitute product that isn't the same product that we're offering, but does alleviate the same type of pain point for people? Now, I'm thinking about this from an entrepreneurial standpoint, right? Businesses exist to solve pains for people, provide them some sort of value that alleviates those pain points for them. Now, threat of substitutes is hinting at, are there other products that do the same thing that mine does, alleviates the same pain that I do, that people could use if they wanted? So essentially all we're getting at here is do they have an alternative option if they don't want to use what I have to offer? So we can understand here that, you know, like if substitutes are readily available, the threat of substitutes is high, right? Whether or not people think that it's an acceptable comparable substitute, if they think so, if it does the same job and they're willing to use that instead of mine because it's more favorable for them, those aren't good for us as a business, right? That makes our industry less attractive because what we're offering is essentially less valuable all of the time. So the one big rule we want to keep in mind here is essentially the lower the price, the higher the quality, and the lower the switching costs are for people to switch products, the more intense this competitive pressure is going to be. So when we have low price items, when we have high quality items, and when we have really you know, like low switching costs, these are all going to be elements that can definitely influence the strength of this threat of substitute products or services. Again, some great elements for you to review if you'd like, that give you some ideas about when threats of substitutes might get more intense and when they might be less intense. Now, we also have to think about two different threats, and one would be the bargaining power of our suppliers. So bargaining power of suppliers is basically saying, we as a company, we need things in order to operate. We need resources. We need access to certain things in order to, you know, produce our product or service and get the things done that we need to provide value to our customers. So we rely on other businesses for those things often. How much bargaining power do those suppliers have over us, right? This can be affected by things like, if we need a specific supply or resource and there isn't much of it available around, that's not good for us, right? It's not readily available. So, you know, like there's going to be a limited supply. That means that our suppliers know that what they're offering is even more valuable because it's rarer and more limited. That means that they can have more say in how much they charge us for it. That increases our costs. That leads to kind of, you know, like increased probably the amount that we have to increase the price of our product for people, and it gets passed on to our consumers. And the higher the price, the more that we exclude price sensitive people, the less likely people are to use our product. Fewer sales that we make, not good, right? Essentially, we want the amount of power our suppliers have over telling us this is what you're paying for the things we give you. We want that amount to be very low. So powerful or influential suppliers are a source of really strong competitive pressure. when they have the ability to charge us higher prices, when they understand that what they have is valuable and rare, when they understand it'll be hard for us to find alternatives, they know they've got a lot of bargaining power. We don't want that. Again, some great examples here for you to look at when power of suppliers might be increased or mitigated. But this isn't the only bargaining power that we have, right? We know we need things, but we also sell things to people. So bargaining power of buyers is another important element that we need to think about. It's one of these important Porter's 5 forces, right? The bargaining power of buyers is basically saying, how much bargaining power do our customers have over us? All right. Our buyers, maybe we are a business to business and we only sell things in huge quantities to a few purchasers. Well, if we know that one buyer accounts for a ton of our sales, they have a lot of power over us because they know that switching to someone else or ending their agreement with us to purchase at certain quantities could have a huge impact on our business, right? Or it could be that there's the cost to switch providers, the number of buyers there are on the market, how well informed people are. These things all impact how much bargaining power buyers have in our market. And essentially, the more and more and more options they have, or the larger the number of competitors there are within our industry, probably the more bargaining power our buyers are going to have because they have tons of alternatives. They can easily say, fine, if you're not doing it for me, I can go with someone else and I can still get what I want. We don't want that from a business standpoint. So that's what makes this a really significant force for us to consider when we're talking about assessing our external situation or our industry here. So, but really importantly to this, not all buyers of our industry's products are going to have equal amounts of bargaining power, right? Some are more or less sensitive than others are to price, quality, service differences. So this is why it's important that we understand who our buyers are, what's important to them, and what will lead to them having increased or decreased amounts of bargaining power over us about how much we can sell our stuff for. So here are again another great list of situations that may intensify or mitigate this specific threat. Now, going all the way back, if we jump back just real quick, we can see that this whole model together, right here again, just familiarize yourself with this and understand that these 5 forces are the ways that we evaluate our external environment, the way that we determine what the reality of the industry we compete in really looks like. These questions, again, review them, make sure you understand what they're about. And if you got questions, holler at me.